The night air was thick with the scent of rain on hot asphalt as James Carter, a 50-year-old man with a quiet strength about him, turned onto Elmwood Avenue. His black sedan rolled smoothly through the suburban streets, headlights cutting through the dim glow of street lamps. It had been a long day, meetings with community leaders, strategizing reforms, working to make a difference. His mind wasn't on the road so much as it was on his wife's famous roast waiting at home. The one meal that could make all the day's stress disappear. Then, red and blue lights exploded in his rearview mirror. James's heart didn't race. This wasn't the first time. But that didn't make it any less infuriating. Not again. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he glanced at the speedometer. 29 in a 35. No traffic violations. No broken taillights. He knew the drill. Keep both hands visible. Move slow. Keep his voice calm. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he knew that one wrong move could be twisted into justification for a bullet, a beating, or worse. A flashlight's harsh beam slashed into his car as the first officer stalked toward him. His stance aggressive, his presence a warning. The second cop hovered near the back, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "You in a hurry tonight?" the first officer snapped, his voice dripping with suspicion. James met his eyes in the mirror. "Here we go." "No, sir, just heading home," he said evenly, his voice controlled but firm. The officer's flashlight lingered too long on James's face before darting to the console. The passenger seat, as if searching for a reason, a weapon, drugs, something to justify what was already unfolding. License and registration. James moved deliberately, narrating each motion. "I'm reaching for my registration now. My license is in my wallet, I'll get it after." The officer didn't respond, but James caught it, the slight stiffening, the tension in his jaw. They wanted this to escalate. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" The question was a game, a trick. James already knew. "No, sir," he replied, keeping his voice steady. "You were swerving," the cop said. A lie, a provocation. James's frown was brief but unmistakable. "With all due respect, officer, I wasn't swerving. My dash cam can verify that." The cop's eyes flickered, brief, but telling. Then his lips curled into a smirk. "Dash cam, huh? That'll be confiscated. Step out of the vehicle." James's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a traffic stop. This was something else. As the cuffs snapped too tight around his wrists, James remained silent, calculating, waiting. These two had no idea who they had just arrested. But they were about to find out. If you're as fired up as we are, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Because what happens next? Oh, you're not gonna want to miss this. James Carter sat stiffly in the back of the patrol car, his wrists burning from the too tight metal of the handcuffs. Outside the window, the world blurred past, his world. The one he had spent decades protecting and serving. The irony twisted deep, cutting at something raw inside him. The officers in the front seat laughed, exchanging casual banter, as if they hadn't just violated a man's rights, as if they hadn't just humiliated him, yanking him from his own car, throwing him against the hood, treating him like a criminal. "So, what's your story?" the younger cop, Officer Daniels, asked, glancing back at James in the rearview mirror. "Late-night drug run? Are you just like giving us a hard time?" James didn't flinch, didn't react. He had learned long ago that men like this fed on reactions, on power plays, on intimidation. He simply met Daniels' gaze in the mirror and said, "I'm just a man trying to get home." Daniels chuckled. The other officer, Reed, a stocky man with the smirk of someone who enjoyed his job a little too much, snorted. "Yeah, we hear that all the time. Reckless drivers always got an excuse." James turned to the window, ignoring them, watching the city he had sworn to protect roll past him. The same streets where he had helped mothers find their missing children, counseled young men on the dangers of falling into the wrong crowd, worked day in and day out to make a difference. And yet, here he was, a suspect, a target. His mind raced. They didn't run his plates. They never asked where he was coming from. They had no probable cause. This was profiling, plain and simple. And the worst part? He wasn't surprised. At the precinct, the fluorescent lights cast everything in a harsh glare. Daniels yanked him out of the car with unnecessary force, guiding him through the station like a trophy. A few other officers glanced up, their brows furrowing in confusion. But no one spoke up. "Welcome to your new home," Reed said mockingly as they shoved James into a holding cell. The metal door slammed shut behind him. James exhaled slowly, adjusting his posture on the hard bench. He wasn't angry. He was calculating, because soon, very soon, everything would change. Outside, Daniels leaned on the desk, flipping through James's wallet. Nothing suspicious, just another guy with a clean record. He muttered, disappointed. Reed shrugged. "Doesn't matter. We'll find something. They always got skeletons in the closet." James heard every word, but he didn't move, didn't react. He just sat there, waiting, because the moment they ran his name, when someone higher up realized who they had just arrested, these two offices' smug little world was about to come crashing down. And when it did, they would learn exactly who they had messed with. If this injustice makes your blood boil, don't just watch, be part of the conversation. Like, comment, and subscribe, because this fight, it's far from over. James Carter sat motionless in the cold, dimly lit holding cell, his mind racing while his hands throbbed from the two tight handcuffs they had only just removed. Hours had passed, no charges, no explanations, just silence. Outside the bars, Officers Daniels and Reed lounged at their desks, laughing as if this was all some big joke. "I'll bet he's got something hidden in his past," Daniels muttered, tapping James's confiscated wallet against his palm. "These guys always do." "Yeah," Reed chuckled. "A guy like him doesn't get that nice of a car without cutting some corners. Maybe he's got a record sealed up somewhere. Wouldn't be the first time." James closed his eyes, breathing deep through his nose. Not because he was scared, but because he was furious. These men, these pathetic, power-drunk cowards, were everything he had spent his career fighting against. They weren't here to serve or protect. They were here to dominate, to dehumanize, to remind people like him that no matter how much good they did, no matter how hard they worked, they would never be safe. The cell door rattled. Footsteps approached. Then, a new voice, sharp, professional, and impatient. "What the hell is going on here?" Lieutenant Morgan stood in front of the cell, her badge gleaming under the harsh light. She flipped through the thin stack of paperwork in her hands, her frown deepening. "You arrested him for reckless driving? Where's the report? The evidence?" Daniels stood straighter. "We, haven't processed it yet." "Haven't processed it?" Morgan cut him off, eyes narrowing. "So, you arrested a man and threw him in a cell with no proof, no cause, and didn't even check the footage?" Silence. James watched as the color drained from Daniel's face. Reed shifted uncomfortably. The fear was finally creeping in. "Sir," Morgan said, turning to James, "do you have a dash cam?" He nodded. "It's in my car, recording everything." The lieutenant's eyes hardened. She turned back to the officers. "Get that footage, now." Daniels hesitated. We're gonna. Now," Morgan snapped, her voice like a gunshot. Minutes later, the precinct fell into complete silence as the footage played on a small monitor. James watched their faces, memorized every twitch of panic, every flicker of dread, as the truth unraveled in front of them. The video was damning. No swerving, no reckless driving, only two cops tailing an innocent man. Lights flashing, guns ready, eager to make an arrest that never should have happened. And then, the worst part. "Another one of them," Daniels muttered on camera as he stepped up to James's window. "Figures," Reed had chuckled in response. The room was deathly still. Morgan's hand clenched into a fist. "Unbelievable," she whispered. Then she turned, her gaze like fire. "Daniels, Reed, get in my office. Now." James exhaled slowly. It was happening. The reckoning. The moment these men realized their careers were over. And he wasn't done yet. If this made you angry, hit that like button right now. Justice is coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The courtroom buzzed with tension, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone knew this was more than just a hearing, it was a reckoning. James Carter sat at the defendant's table, his expression unreadable, but his fists were clenched just beneath the table. His attorney, Sandra Reyes, flipped through a thick folder of evidence, her face as sharp as a blade. Across the room, Officers Daniels and Reed sat stiffly, their department-appointed lawyer whispering urgently to them. Daniels's foot tapped uncontrollably against the floor, while Reed, who had been so smug, so arrogant, was pale. His jaw set tight. The judge, a stern-looking man with years of no-nonsense experience, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. We are here today to address the charges brought against Mr. James Carter. Prosecution. You may proceed. The prosecutor, a nervous young man who clearly hadn't realized what he was walking into, stood and tried to make his case. On the night in question, the defendant was observed driving recklessly, swerving into another lane. Upon being stopped by officers Daniels and Reed, he became uncooperative and resisted arrest. Sandra barely suppressed a smile. She leaned toward James and whispered, "They just walked right into it." James didn't answer. He was waiting for the moment they realized they had lost. When it was her turn, Sandra stood slowly, deliberately, letting silence stretch just long enough to make the room feel heavy. Then, she spoke. "Your Honor, the charges against my client are not only baseless but also a clear example of racial profiling and abuse of power. To prove this, I would like to present video evidence that directly contradicts the office's statements." A murmur spread through the room. The judge nodded. "Proceed." The bailiff dimmed the lights, and the dash cam footage lit up the screen. James didn't watch the video, he already knew what it showed. Instead, he watched Daniels and Reed. Daniels froze. Reed's hands curled into fists on his lap. The footage was devastating. No reckless driving, no swerving, nothing, just James, driving calmly under the speed limit, before red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Then came the body cam footage. The room gasped as Daniels' voice rang out. "Another one of them." Then Reed's laugh. "Figures." The footage didn't lie. It showed everything, James complying, moving slowly, narrating his every action while the officers escalated for no reason. Sandra paused the video and turned to the courtroom. "This isn't just an abuse of power. Your Honor, this is a crime." The judge's face was like stone. He turned to Daniels and Reed. "Do you have anything to say for yourselves?" They didn't, because they knew it was over. The courtroom was silent for a long moment. Then the judge spoke. "The charges against Mr. Carter are dismissed immediately. However, this court will proceed with a formal investigation into the conduct of officers Daniels and Reed." The room erupted. Daniels sank into his chair. Reed looked like he wanted to disappear. "And James?" He exhaled, for the first time in what felt like years. Justice wasn't just coming, it was here. What do you think? Were the officers just doing their jobs? Or did they get what they deserved? Comment below, because this story isn't just fiction. It's reality. The weight of the night still clung to James Carter as he stepped out of the courthouse. The early morning sun offering little warmth against the cold reality of what had just happened. He had won. The charges against him were dismissed. The officers who had profiled and humiliated him were under investigation. But why didn't it feel like a victory? Reporters swarmed him the moment he crossed the threshold. "Chief Carter, do you have a statement? How do you feel about the officers being suspended? What does this mean for the police department?" He raised a hand, and the crowd fell into an uneasy silence. "This case was never just about me," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "It's about a system that allows officers like Daniels and Reed to operate unchecked. It's about every person who's been pulled over for no reason. Every mother who has had to tell her son to keep his hands visible and his voice calm. It's about a truth we all know but too many choose to ignore." The reporters shouted more questions. But James didn't linger. He had more important battles to fight. When he arrived at the precinct, his assistant Anita looked up, eyes wide. "Chief, you're here early." James nodded. "It's been a long night. I need you to gather everyone in the briefing room. We're having a meeting today." He walked into his office, shut the door, and finally, let himself feel it. The exhaustion, the anger, the helplessness. He thought of all the people who weren't as lucky as him. The ones who had been pulled over and never made it home. The ones who didn't have dash cams, lawyers, or public outrage to save them. He sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. What if he hadn't been the police chief? Would anyone have cared? Would he have been just another name on a list? Another case buried under excuses and bureaucracy? A knock at the door. Anita peeked inside, her voice softer than usual. "Chief, everyone's here." James stood, straightening his tie. It was time. The room was packed when he walked in. Officers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided his gaze, some looked defiant, and some actually looked ashamed. What happened to me last night wasn't just about me, James said, scanning the room. It was about this department, this culture, this system, and as long as I'm chief, I won't tolerate it. A heavy silence fell. Then, a voice from the back. Chief, if this happened to you, what does that mean for the rest of us? James exhaled. It means we have a lot of work to do. And it starts today. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. And if you believe in this fight, hit that subscribe button. Because we're not stopping here. We're just getting started. Months had passed since that night. Since the flashing lights in the rearview mirror. Since the cold steel of the handcuffs. Since James Carter sat in a jail cell, waiting for a system he had sworn to uphold to recognize its own failures. But today was different. Today, he stood in front of a new police department. The precinct was buzzing, not with whispers of misconduct, but with a new energy, a new purpose. Officers who once looked at him with skepticism now listened when he spoke. Those who once turned a blind eye to injustice had been forced to confront it. And those who refused to change, they were gone. The community had responded, too. After the footage of his wrongful arrest went public, the city demanded accountability. People who had once feared speaking out found their voices. Community leaders joined James in his mission, working with him to rebuild trust, one step at a time. And now, at the front of a packed town hall, he faced the people he had sworn to serve. Chief Carter, what you went through, that could have been any of us. A young man said, his voice unsteady, but you fought back, not just for yourself, but for all of us. James nodded, his chest tightening. This wasn't just his fight. It never had been. Change doesn't happen overnight, James said, his voice strong but measured. We still have work to do. But what I've learned through all of this is simple: silence is complicity. If we see injustice, we have to speak up. If we want change, we have to demand it. And if we want a better future, we have to build it together. The room erupted in applause. As the meeting ended, James lingered, shaking hands, listening to stories, hearing the pain, the hope, the gratitude. This was why he fought. This was why he didn't give up. Later that night, he sat at his kitchen table, finally home at a reasonable hour. The smell of his wife's famous roast filling the air. She placed a plate in front of him and sat down, studying him carefully. You okay? She asked softly. James exhaled, nodding. Yeah, I think for the first time in a long time, I actually am. She smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. Because in the end, justice had prevailed, change had begun, and the fight for something better was far from over. Your voice matters, be part of the change. What do you think? Have you ever witnessed injustice? How do you think we can make a difference? Comment below, we want to hear your thoughts. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this isn't just a story, this is real life. And together, we can make a difference.